Hello, hi, good to see you. Well, I don't really see you, but it is good to be here today. October 6th, 2023, Friday, getting ready for a nice weekend. But I want to talk to you today about what I think is a pretty important topic. And this is about the idea of where do you look back and how do you look forward? And how does that help people engage and be better at what they're doing and for what purpose? And I think it's a pretty important thing to understand. In the 30s, in the 1940s, in the 1950s, and the 60s, and the 70s, for years and decades, people went to work and they became the tool for the company to use to be able to just do what the leaders, the executives decided to do in the company. So there was a very small group of people that made decisions and said, this is how we're going to do it. And let's move a machine or a person to do it this way. And that was the entirety of where people stood to get to the outcome that the business wanted. In the 1980s, General Electric, the CEO of General Electric, decided to develop a program called Six Sigma. And within that program, it was really the recognition that how do we engage people? Now, the truth of it, and if you read back, it wasn't really so much about pulling out the power of people as, frankly, to pacify the people, because the generation at that time was thinking that they needed to feel engaged and to be a part of the process, and they also had something to say. So Six Sigma was really developed as a way to give the sensation that ideas were happening. Now, in truth, it was very effective, and as new ideas from groups within an organization came out, those ideas effectively began to improve an organization. At least it wasn't just a small group of people deciding on something. But here's the thing. Although the ideas came out, it didn't necessarily shape how you were going to implement those ideas. And the implementation of those ideas really was still stuck in the hands of a few. So here are some ideas, you take it to the few, and the few decide, here's how we're going to implement it. But over the 90s and into the 2000s and moving forward, people just needed to be more engaged. And I have to tell you this, I'm an old guy with many decades of my own experience, but if I don't change, I'm not going to be able to get the results that we need to get. So change is not about me fighting society's change, emotions, and approach, new generations thinking. It's about how I participate within that. So it's how do I participate in that, which really is about really not how I did it in the past, but how I need to do it in the future. I want to show you a graphic right now that I think is going to be pretty valuable to you. We have feedback and we have feed forward. And what I would tell you is this. My father, who was a brilliant man and insisted on perfection and having me as his child do better at what I was doing, always told me what was wrong, always told me what I should not have done. And the goal, I'm sure he had, was to make sure that in the future I did it and that I did it differently and that I improved. So the entirety of the way that he worked to help me improve was only focusing on my past. He was only commenting on what I had already done, comment on previous work. And I'll tell you what it led to. It led to me feeling judged, feeling isolated, feeling less, and it did not necessarily motivate me to be better. It certainly didn't tell me how to be better. I was able to see my problems. He pointed out my problems, and he would dump on me. It was like, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. And there was no plan of action. It wasn't ever a conversation about what we would do in the future. Today, our generations want to not be talking about what was in the past. And although my father was not unique in the fact that people preferred to find out what's wrong, not what's right, it changed. And people, my generation, and as we got further along, began to say, wait a minute, living in my past doesn't do me much good. It's not really helping me change. I still don't know how to make a change. So this leads to today's thinking of feed forward. Feed forward is really just, look, what do we do now? How do we do something? What do we do next time? Where is the task that needs to be done? Not who is going to fail at the task, but where is the task that needs to be done? And what does this bring you? It brings you thinking that allows you to see the possibilities, to see the specific actions, and to be able to create a specific plan for improvement. Okay, let me talk to you a little more, and we'll get rid of this graphic for the moment. I'll bring it back later. I referred to the idea that people like to talk about what's wrong, not what's right. And I have a belief about that. And my belief is that talking about what's wrong, I somehow makes people feel pretty smart, because it's not difficult for me to look at something that has happened and to find out the flaws in what has happened. It's just not the very tough to do that. It also creates drama and emotion. And frankly, people like to connect with what is wrong. I'll give you an example of myself. The other day, I'm in a board meeting, and I quickly put together a graphic of how we were performing over the last 18 months. And when I put it in, the numbers, the 18 months of performance, and this was in like 30 seconds, actually, while I was doing the board meeting and talking, I put it in backwards. So the graphic started, the closest term, the near term, was on the left, and the farthest date was on the right. Well, we all know that graphics work the other way, right? They start from left as the oldest date, and they go to right. So we were improving, and you would have seen the improvement like this. But because I put it in the opposite way, it looked like this. Didn't change the numbers, didn't change the point I was making. But the reality is, for a long period of time after I showed it, people began to chuckle and laugh, and it was a serious moment in the meeting. Nonetheless, people were critical. They felt that they could gather friendship, they could gather within each other and share the joke that this was wrong, this was not right. And through that entire experience, we ended up missing the salient point. Of course, I recognized it, I worked hard and made the point, but the emotion that should have been attached to the point disappeared. And it meant that the value of the point I was making was less than what I had hoped it would be. And that was because people look at what is critical. as easy to do, easy to bond with each other, versus what is right. And what is right is what we do in the future. Now, look, there are times we just want to look back and we think that's of value, and I'll give you a good example right here. The Denver Nuggets, of which is my team in basketball, they won the finals of the NBA championship. And I wear this all the time to remind myself and people around me that the Denver Nuggets are champions, and they will always be champions. So there are times you just want to look back. But does this championship mean that this year and next year they can be championships? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that they had a success in their past, and that success is something to celebrate. Sometimes when we look at the past and we make a plan for the future, it doesn't work. And I'll give you a quick example. Last night, I really was in the mood for junk food. And I had a few of these Cheetos. And, I don't eat them much, but they just really worked for me last night. And I had a few. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to have some of these when I wake up in the morning. I don't know why I don't eat like that. I had a craving to do it. Well, I look at these this morning and they disgust me. So planning forward and looking back, it's kind of a difficult thing to decide, where do you draw the line? I'll tell you, I like to do it this way. I like to recognize that the past has given me experiences, but that past does not insist that I judge what I did in the past and how it applies to the future. So as an example, I have had customers or potential customers say no to me and decide, no, we're not going to use you, your service, or your product. And because I was desperate to make that sale, I may have gotten on an airplane and flown out, broken into their boardrooms and convinced them to buy something after all. And most of the time, I haven't been able to convince them. Most of the time, I didn't do it. But occasionally, I did have success. So if I now want to go to the future and take that past experience, where does that reside? Does it reside in the idea that, look, most of the time it doesn't work, so don't get on an airplane, don't fly out? The past does not necessarily reflect on the future. I believe you want to recognize there is an experience there. You want to not dwell on that experience. I think most of us are smart enough to know that we can feel it and see what has been done, but all of us want something better in our future, don't we? All of us want to find out, how do I get better? What do I need to do now? Not, did I win the NBA championship last year, but how do I win it this year? So there's something that I've done in my career, which is I have acquired a number of companies. I have specifically looked at 14 different companies that I had letters of intent to acquire. That's something that's happened in my past. Of those, I've been able to close on 6 of those. So of the 14, I've been able to close on 6. Now, as I would go through one after the other, if I got stuck in my rate of failure, I assure you I never would have gotten to the 6 that were game changers in my life. So it's said that, yes, I have an experience that sometimes these deals break down. So as I move into the future, continue to do those deals, maybe I've learned that there is a percentage of failure or success that works. Maybe it's 6 out of 14. I don't know for sure. And maybe there's value to that. But in my future, it maybe is telling me do more, not less. Do more, not less. Not expect that it won't work because the majority of them didn't work. Now, we talk about debriefing as a way to interpret the past. And I believe a debrief can be beneficial, but the problem with a debrief is that people are doing the debrief. And as I said earlier, people, their nature is to see what is wrong, not what is right. So the risk in debriefing is to get too involved in the problems that happened. And those problems that happen can create such an acute feeling of anxiety in the people that you're talking to that essentially that becomes defeatist. And then how do you really feed forward if the feedback you're giving it creates a problem? So here's what I would say, and I'm going to put up the graphic again to remind you of this. Feedback is a focus on the past. Giving feedback does, because it has inherent problems, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, because it also can create opportunities for learning. But you must be very aware of where feedback resides in learning. And you really have to understand that the strength today of generations to get to the outcome that we all want to get to is how do we do it forward? How do we feed forward, not feedback? How can we plan next steps? We can't change past steps. So listen, let me finish with this. We'll take away the graphic at this point. Let's finish this way. Understand this, that business over the decades and centuries has always been the same. You're selling something, you're trying to accomplish something. And that hasn't changed. The idea of what the purpose of a business is, in my opinion, has not ever changed. But the method within the generations that you're working with today has to change. So where we have these exclusive decision groups, and today, and it evolved to more people participate in deciding, to a group of people in a flatter organization working together, it's still for the same purpose, not a different purpose, just to get to the outcome that the nature of business wants to get to. But don't ignore these differences. Don't look at this and say, well, look, this is just no different. Of course I look at the past. Of course I plan for the future. Don't be cavalier about it. Recognize that when you have new terminology like feed forward, it's there for a purpose to help you define a better way to do something. Maybe it's the same outcome you want as 50 years ago, but the truth is maybe you get there faster, more powerfully, and more pyramidically successful. So listen, with that, I'll leave you for the weekend. I am so happy to get to talk. I hope that this resonates for you and gives you something to think about in your own lives and in your own work, and how you relate to problems and lead to success. So let's feed forward. You take care. Bye-bye.